Whether on the field, on the court, or on the balance beam, there's more to winning than the final score. Hi, I'm Patrick Manning of Black Desert Resort. We recognize the effort it takes to succeed. That's why we are proud to partner with the Utah Checkdown, the podcast that tells you the story before the game, then gives you a recap of what happened when it's all over. The grit, the glory, and the disappointments. Join us for stories of Utah's finest athletes and coaches. Thanks for listening.
You're listening to the Utah Checkdown Podcast. And now your host, Josh Furlong.
Welcome back to another edition of the Utah Checkdown Podcast. I am Josh Furlong. Happy to be back with you again today on a cool Thursday morning. It's starting to become fall weather finally. It's been a bit of a hit and miss lately, where it's been a little bit warmer, which is not a bad thing. I'm not opposed to it, but I do like that fall weather, right? You get that hoodie season. Things are looking up that way, where it's cool. You don't have to worry about the heat so much. So we're there. Unfortunately, in Utah, it'll probably just, next week will be winter, and we'll miss all of it. But I'm enjoying it for what it's worth right now. Happy to have it. Something to look forward to, I guess, right? All right. Well, let's jump into it. First, let me tell you about our partners, Black Desert, who are helping with the KSL.com Beyond the Game video series. The videos highlight various athletes and give an inside look into their life. Recently, we talked with former Utah offensive lineman Garrett Bowles about how a second chance at life allowed him to pay it forward to troubled youth. You can check out that video and many others on KSL.com. Black Desert is a new resort destination in St. George that features a championship Tom Weiskopf 19-hole golf course that combines a private club filled with destination resort golf, lava fields, and 360-degree vistas. Black Desert is changing entertainment in southern Utah, and they're just beginning. Black Desert, where remarkable is within reach, home of the Black Desert Championship PGA Tour. All right, we're going to jump right into this. Well, like we do every Thursday, we're going to talk a little bit about what has happened since we last talked on Monday. Obviously, on Monday, we got to talk to Kyle Whittingham after Andy Ludwig had resigned from his post. And Mike Bajakian, yes, I can say it on the air now. For some reason, my brain was not computing that on Monday, and it wasn't coming out. So it's Bajakian. We're going to go with it. Everything's good now. I'm sorry for the problems last episode. But yes, Mike Bajakian was named the interim offensive coordinator, and that night we got a chance to talk to him. So let's kind of jump in a little bit to kind of who he is and what this is all about. But Bajakian is an experienced offensive coordinator, right? He's had many stints at various programs, whether that's Northwestern, Boston College, Tennessee, Cincinnati, Central Michigan. He's also coached in the NFL, Tampa Bay, with Chicago, and so he's had a lot of experience, right? So this is a guy that isn't just this first-time play caller that Utah is relying upon. And so, he's a guy that Kyle Whittingham said felt to be the most natural, mostly, I don't want to say mostly, but in part because of his relationship with the quarterbacks, his relationship with Isaac Wilson. If you want to keep things familiar, you want to be able to kind of have that same voice there. So this becomes an opportunity for Utah to kind of keep some consistency in terms of the play calling with Isaac Wilson. However, in relation to play calling, and we'll talk about this, it's going to change a bit, but it's still going to be the same. Bajakian said, well, first off, he joked that he's going to run the wishbone triple option. Honestly, I think that'd be hilarious if he kind of threw that out there as just kind of like, yeah, we're going to run this, and then joked about it, and then they really did for the first series or whatever, just for the fun of it. I think it'd be great. Like, why not run the triple option? I mean, I think it could be a lot of fun. So, and to be honest, against this Houston team that we'll talk about in a minute, you probably could be pretty effective with the triple option. So, anyways, he's not going to run the triple option. But, he talked about the system is a system, right? They're 7 games into the season. They're not going to suddenly change. Things aren't going to suddenly be this revolutionary thing where, the whole offensive system changes. So like there is a certain baseline for where this team can be, right? The playbook is there. Andy Ludwig has already created that. And so there's going to be a lot of familiar terminologies and a lot of familiar plays, just simply because that's, what they have. You can't install an offense in the middle of a season and expect everything to go well. Now, with that being said, maybe there's some more tweaks that are made going into the BYU game because you get 2 weeks, right? So you have that bye week and then you have the week leading up to BYU. So maybe there's some additional changes that we see there, but it's still going to be a very similar thing. You can't expect players to change a lot. Each week is spent focusing on the opponent and trying to do things to scheme against them. And when you're trying to do things that change your entire identity, that's not an easy challenge. And so the whole point of switching to Mike Bajakian was to simplify things, right? You wanted to be able to make things easier for people, especially for Isaac Wilson. And so trying to complicate matters by trying to switch things up and trying to have a different offense wasn't going to help, right? As Kyle said earlier in the week, he said the whole point of this too was to get a different voice. Andy Ludwig has been in the system for his second time since 2019. It's not that the players didn't respect him or that they didn't, have his back in a lot of things. I mean, Isaac Wilson said that he, came to Utah in large part because of Andy. So this is, the players respect him. They like him. Obviously, he's a brilliant mind, and you saw what he was able to do, especially with Tyler Huntley in his last year and also with Cam Rising. But for whatever reason, his voice just isn't working right now. And whether that's the play calling or players not believing in what he's putting out there right now, that's only really for them to decide. And, you can speculate and do all that, but it's not really going to matter because at the end of the day, it's about the players. So getting back to this, as I said, the system is a system. Bajakian said, I don't think there's a magic potion that is going to fix things. And he's right. It's not like all of a sudden they're going to snap a finger and everything's going to change, right? Like for anybody that's coming into this game this week thinking that Utah's suddenly going to be this, potent offense and all of a sudden everything's going to click and they're going to be up to, 35 points and everything. I mean, I'm not saying that they couldn't score that many points against Houston and kind of have this revitalized look to themselves, but it's not like suddenly everything that has been causing problems for Utah is going to change. And not all of that was Andy Ludwig. We've talked about that. There's been many issues, right? And so there's a lot of things that need to be corrected. But having a new voice in that room gives you potential to be able to maybe make those changes, right? And be able to help. For him, knowing that the system is the system, his main focus is he wants to focus on the energy, right? He wants to get these guys up. He wants to get that back. He wants to make sure that they're all bought in and ready to go. And really, it's just about focusing on the little things. He equated it to being a golfer, and he says he's not really much of a golfer, but as a golfer, if you want to improve your game, it's focusing on the little things. It's focusing on putting. That's kind of what he said. It's like focusing on your short game, getting in there and working on those little things, because then, you're going to drive the ball, whatever it may be, and you're going to do what you need to do to get there. But when you need to get, the ball in the hole, the ultimate point of the game, you've got to work on those small little things that are going to be beneficial. Everybody wants to have a longer drive, right? Everybody wants to be this high-level team that's going to put up a ton of points and move the offense down the field. But in this case, in Utah, it's finishing in the red zone. It's finishing, plays where they just need to make these small improvements to be able to help. That's what he's focusing on, right? Like those big things. It's not that Utah has been adept at that. Like that, it's not like they haven't been able to focus on that and do what they need to. It's more just finishing where they need to, right? Finding ways to be able to complete in the red zone and being able to get the touchdowns that you need to. Now, obviously, the last couple weeks, the ball hasn't even moved, right? Like it's really struggled to be able to go. Last week especially, the ball barely even crossed the midfield outside of the 71-yard touchdown that Isaac threw to Money Parks. But, I think that's really his main emphasis, is just focusing on those things. And, It's real easy to say those things right now on a Monday, right? When he was saying that, it's easy to be able to look at that and say, okay, this is where Utah needs to be. The reality is it's got to pair with his play calling mixed with what the players perform out there, right? I think you've got a room right now that is incredibly hungry to do what they need to, right? They're frustrated, right? They're frustrated with the losses. Nobody wants to have 3 losses on the season, this point in the season especially. And so these guys are hungry to get something. This becomes an opportunity to believe in Bajakian, right? Whether you agree with how the system has been run or anything, how it's gone in the past, this is now a new start for a lot of these players. And maybe some of these guys that haven't been able to get in some time for whatever reason, right? And I'm not going to get into that. We've talked a lot about some of these guys. But this is a new opportunity for these guys to kind of really just own up whatever they can do, work hard, show what they can kind of provide for the team, and hope that you can get that playing time. And the players that are going to bring that energy and that are focusing on those little things, those are the players that are going to continue to get the ball, right? And they're continually going to get to play. It's all about, the little things, right? Like that's the whole point of it. And so you're going to see that emphasis of where he's going to go. Now, part of this is I'm really curious to see what Bajakian does in terms of whether he goes into the booth or stays on the sideline. He was undecided on Monday, and even Kyle Whittingham on Tuesday wasn't trying to pressure him into a certain direction. In the past, Kyle had always wanted to have his offensive coordinator in the booth. It makes sense. You get the bird's eye view. You're able to help and kind of see the offense from that perspective. Anybody that's been on a field or been in kind of a close proximity to that knows that it's kind of a challenge to see plays, especially on offense, kind of develop when you're on the sideline. However, with that being said, they have these new iPads, or I think with the Big 12, it is the Microsoft, I'm blanking on the name of the Surface, I think it is. So they have these tablets, we'll call them. That Kyle and Mike have both said kind of changed the game for offensive coordinators, right? In terms of Bajakian, you want him close to Isaac. You want him to be able to be that first person that he goes to, that he has been, where he can say, okay, here's what you did, here's what you need to, this is how we need to fix it. You remove part of that when he goes up into the booth. And so that becomes a challenge, and you lose that opportunity to coach him. There's still opportunities there. There's headsets. There's other things, right? But now with these tablets, you can be on the field and kind of show it. So even though you might not be able to get the full bird's eye view, having Bajakian down on the field can be beneficial, especially from a quarterback standpoint. There's still things that they can see because they get that bird's eye view from pictures that are being put on the tablet. And so it's not necessarily a bad thing to have him on the field. I don't know what that'll be for Utah, right? I'm curious to see how this will be. Whether he is on the field, you don't see a ton of offensive coordinators in college on the field, but at the same time, you do have some of that in the NFL, right? A lot of these guys, the head coaches or the offensive coordinators, they are on the field. They're able to be there with the team. They can get the vibe of the team and see what's going on. I think those keys are important, right? When you're in that booth, you're so removed from everything. Like they're literally a few doors down from where the press sits. And so I get the exact same vantage point that they get. And it's a great vantage point, right? Like we get the full all 22. We can see how plays are developing. You can see how everything is set up. But at the same time, you're just so removed from everything, right? There's these thick planes of glass that are standing in your way, especially at Rice-Eccles Stadium. Some stadiums, it's open air and you can get the vibe of everything. But being down on the field is a completely different experience. The media gets to go down onto the field about 5 to 7 minutes at the end of the game, and we get so that we can get to the press conference and everything. And it's a completely different experience for us. We get to see things, we get to feel things. You get the general vibe of how a game is developing, and I think that's an important thing. A lot of people talk about how momentum is a real thing. I truly believe it, right? You can feel it, and I think as an offensive coordinator, you kind of need to be down in the thick of it with your players. That's not to say that being up in the booth is a bad thing, right? Like I said, you get that great view. You can see how players are developing that way that you're not going to be able to see on the field outside of the tablets and everything. And so it just varies, But that's going to be something that I'm curious to see. I have to imagine that if something isn't working, that they may switch that up in a different week. But I'm curious to see how that goes. Now with Bajakian, as I said, the biggest emphasis here is about focusing on Isaac Wilson. Obviously, other players have to be focused in on, right? But Wilson is the guy that matters in this offense, because if Wilson can't get the ball moving, it doesn't matter what everybody else is doing, right? It doesn't matter that Dorian Singer or Money Parks are getting open all the time, or Dallin Bentley is always in the flats and he's ready to get the ball, or Brant Keithy is obviously that mismatch that just doesn't work, but he always finds the opportunities. None of that matters if Isaac isn't getting the ball moving downfield, right? And we've seen this. I know Isaac has taken a ton of heat after last week, right? And I don't think it's fully fair on him. And, I want to do a podcast maybe in the bye week where we kind of break down some of what he's doing and everything and go into it. I'm not here to carry his water, right? That's not my job. My job is to look at what's going on. And if he's not doing well, then I'm going to call it out just like I do anybody else. But at the same time, this isn't all on Isaac. He's been able to move the ball. You saw that in the Arizona game. As I mentioned, I believe on Monday, that Arizona defense was far better than what Utah's faced the last 2 weeks in their losses. They were able to move the ball. Their problem was they just couldn't convert in the red zone. Things got harder. Play calling was, we've talked about that. It just didn't work. So there's potential there. Now, with that being said, that's not to say that Isaac doesn't need to take, steps, right? Like, there's a lot of talk right now of, you've got to move from being the freshman and having that mindset of just this, not even a carefree, but you've got to be able to move forward and be that leader of the team. Everybody is looking now to what Wilson can do. And there's going to be a lot of pressure on him, as there has been. It's not like this is suddenly new, but you're the face of the team now, essentially. And the quarterback is going to take all the love and they're going to take all the hate. And he recognizes that. It's a tough thing. But he's able to do what he needs to in this offense. Now, with that said, what Bajakian wants to do is he wants to simplify things for Isaac Wilson, right? As a freshman quarterback, things need to be simplified. He's not going to be able to run the same offense that Cam Rising ran, at least in terms of how Cam ran it, right? He's able to do some pre-snap reads to get in there and say, okay, here's what the defense is going to do. I know that, when I look off this defender, this is what's going to happen with this defender, or whatever that may be. You're reading the defensive end, you're reading the linebackers, you're reading whatever that may be to be able to help you, right? Isaac is getting there, and he can do it. It's just more he's not being able to do it at the high or the fast enough speed that Cam is, right? And so what you need to do for a freshman is you need to simplify things. You need to make things easier for them. And unfortunately, for the last few weeks, Andy Ludwig didn't necessarily make it easier on Isaac Wilson. That's not all on Andy, but at the same time, there wasn't a lot of plays in there that made it, simple for him. Start these games out easily, right? Like, get these simple out routes, get the crossing routes, honestly, at this point, you have nothing to lose. So, I know you don't want him to throw more interceptions, but you have nothing to lose in that you can't try some things, right? If you're risk averse like Kyle is, this is your opportunity now to say, you know what? We're going to try some things, because really, what else do you have to lose? You're not making it to the Big 12 championship game. And I know there's some people holding on hope still, and there is still hope, right? Like, in theory, you can still get there with 3 losses. Yes, Utah has to win out. You have to beat BYU. You have to beat Iowa State. All things that are possible, but at the same time, you need so much stuff going well beyond your control that it's not even really worth entertaining at this point until you start winning games, until you start moving the ball, until you start doing the things that you need to even be in that consideration. Putting up 7 points against a very bad TCU defense doesn't qualify you for the Big 12 championship game, right? Like, that's just not going to happen. Your defense allowed 13 points and you still couldn't win a game. Like, that's the nature of what it is. So all this talk of, not that there's talk of people thinking that it's possible, but anybody that still thinks that there's hope, just squash that right now, right? You can get that hope if things start turning in your favor. And yes, obviously in 2021, I can't even remember the seasons at this point. One of the years that Utah got to the Big 12 or the Pac-12 championship, everything had to go their way, and it did, right? And so it's not that that's not possible, but I think this is an even more extraordinary case where it's just not something that's likely. So you've got that, right? The point here is you want to build on Isaac Wilson's strengths, and you want to be able to do things that are simplified. You want to make it so that it's easier. Isaac ran a system that was very much so functioning on an RPO at Corner Canyon. That is exactly what Bajakian wants to do. He wants to go with tempo. He wants to use more of an RPO system, be in the shotgun, wants to be able to he utilizes his tight ends. He loves that. He wants to get the running backs out in space. These are all things that Utah can be very talented at, and they just kind of haven't done much, right? Like, there's no tempo usually at Utah. They're very much so a huddle team, kind of methodically get up into the line. It's all about ball control, whether it's on offense or defense. You're trying to milk the clock to some extent. This is, there's a lot of inside zone stuff. They're not utilizing their running backs in space. That's what Bajakian is wanting to do. He wants to be able to use tempo, try to speed things up a little bit, try to help that offense move. He wants to utilize those tight ends. He wants to be able to get those running backs out in space. And if you can get them out in space, look what Mekhi Bernard can do. Look what a Dijon Stanley can do, especially in space. Like, the dude is incredibly fast, and if you give him just an inch, he's going to take a mile of room to be able to get to where he needs to go. So there's that. Now, but once again, it comes back to just simplifying things, right? Like, you need to be able to give Isaac confidence, and so that when you do want to dial up that 71-yard bomb to Money Parks, you know that he can do it. He hit him in stride. He was able to do what he needed to be able to get there. He can make those throws, but you've got to make it easier. Let that offense feel like there's a rhythm, right? Take those first 2 first down plays and try to get something going. It doesn't have to be this big chunk yardage stuff. And Isaac's going to look for some of those, right? As a freshman, you want that big thing. You don't want to settle for the 4-yard pass that is going to set you up for a nice third down. You want to be able to get that 17-yard pass that's going to get you the bigger play and move you down the field faster as chunk yardage. Those will come, right? Like, as a veteran quarterback, those will come and you're going to get there. But as you start getting comfortable and you start getting into a rhythm, that's what's going to help Isaac more than anything. Then you're going to start seeing him be a little bit more confident in being able to take those shots. You're then going to start seeing the defense be a little bit more relaxed, because now you're just taking these short yardage situations. You're working your running backs and getting plays that way. Those things help. It honestly matters to the game, right? Don't expect to come out there, though, and see Bajakian all of a sudden throw for all these big yards and everything goes well. Like, it's still a cat and mouse game, right? You're still trying to see what the defense does. You're still trying to figure out how your offense is going to move around. You want to be able to kind of manage things and set things up so that when you do see an opportunity, you can take advantage of it, right? Bajakian loves to be able to use things where he's going to run the same type of run play a few times to be able to set up something for later. So anybody that's frustrated by the multiple inside zone stuff, those things may still exist, right? There still may be some things that you set up from. Maybe it's not always inside zone. Maybe it's outside zone. Maybe it's something that you're doing to be able to set up stuff for later, right? Because then that defense recognizes, oh, they're going to run this same play again, and then suddenly you're in the play action and, you hit Brant Keithy for 20 yards downfield up the seam. It's those types of things that a coordinator is trying to do. They're trying to play that cat and mouse game where you're trying to take advantages of a defense that is starting to get comfortable in what you're doing. They're starting to pick up tendencies, and then once they pick up those tendencies, you fire, and suddenly you change the game on them. You get them on their heels, and it's a challenge, right? And as somebody that's watching this game, as a spectator, right, it's not always easy to pick up those things, right? A lot of those things, and I'm not going to sit here and say that I can pick these up because I can't, right? Like, I'm just not smart enough with football to understand the full cat and mouse game a lot of the times. But when you look at these things, later in retrospect, and you kind of see how they were developing, you can see how that game tape, developed, especially if it's working effectively. If they can get those things going, then you see how they're trying to exploit defenses and how they kind of develop. We still don't fully know how he's going to do that here with this Utah offense, right? Bajakian still is kind of handicapped a little bit in terms of being able to just fully operate it the way that he wants to. But you're going to see some tendencies, and I want to see some of those things with him. Looking at some of his history, and I know that I've seen it on Twitter. I'm not going to reinvent the wheel here at the same time. There's some of these offenses that he's run that they don't look good, right? I mean, you can point to Northwestern. They're not, the shining example of offense. Let's be real. But there are a lot of contributing factors to a lot of these different things. At Northwestern, your talent pool is incredibly tough to get, right? Because it's a prestigious school that is going to recruit just a different athlete. It's kind of like a Stanford. Well, it is like a Stanford in terms of recruiting. And it's just challenging to be able to get, intellectual kid. It's not that they're not. Yeah. Anyway, I'm not going to go down that road. But you're trying to get intellectual kids that are also talented at football, and you've got to do that where you're trying to compete with other people with high academic standards, all that kind of stuff, right? It's just a challenge. So to look at Northwestern's offense, I don't want to say that it's great, because it's not, right? Like, quite honestly, his time at Northwestern, they didn't really do much with an offense, right? If anything, in some ways they got worse. Some years they got better. They got better in their scoring offense last year, and obviously they beat Utah in the bowl game. So I mean, there's a chance. But at the same time, well, and quite honestly, their red zone offense was pretty good last year. They were 41st in the country after being 118th the year before. So maybe there's something, right? Even if Bajakian changes the red zone offense and gets Utah touchdowns, I think people are going to be okay, right? Like, I think the concepts that Utah has can get them to move down the field if the plays are called correctly or called in a way that sets them up. It's just been the red zone that's been kind of their problems. And so if Bajakian can kind of cure that, I think Utah fans will be incredibly happy. Outside of that, his time at Boston College, he had the 47th best, total offense, right? He also had A.J. Dillon in the room, all-time leading rusher there. So, I mean, there was talent, right? He's able to utilize the talent that he has. At Tennessee, it wasn't great either, but they had a terrible offensive line. And some of that is him, some of that's offensive line, some of that's, talent. It just depends. Whereas when he was at Cincinnati and Central Michigan, and obviously when he was at Cincinnati, it was the Big East years, so there was more talent than what it's comparable to now of what Cincinnati was in beforehand. Central Michigan, these two teams, he ran offenses that were far more effective, right? They did very well, some of the best in the country, especially when he was at Central Michigan. This was a very high-level offense, move the ball. Granted, the talent there in terms of who they're playing is different, right? Like, so you can't make these one-to-one comparisons or apples to apples. There's a lot of nuances here, right? And so you're going to see things on Twitter, you're going to see things or hear things about how it is. Yes, Bajakian hasn't had the shining example. It's not like you're looking at him as this guy that's like revolutionized offenses and, you have to get him as the next hire. However, he's been able to do some good things. He's been able to bring some new concepts that are able to help a team. Obviously, he was brought in as an offensive analyst to be able to help with the quarterbacks. He can do that. We still have to see what it means at Utah, right? All of those things that he's done in the past, good and bad, don't really matter because each team is different. And so it's easy to be able to look at that and say, this is what's going to happen, and he's, terrible at this, or he's great at this. Like, it doesn't matter, right? Like, until he can get on the field with Utah and do these things with his team the way that he wants to do it, we don't know. And so that's kind of the nature of it. That's the nature of any of this, right? It's the nature of talking about Utah at the beginning of the season and saying, oh, they have the talent to be able to do this, and with this and this and this, they can get to here. Yeah, they can. Right? Everything is leading up to that. If Cam Rising stays healthy all year, yeah, of course you're probably going to be there, right? He and Andy Ludwig had this connection that they wanted to work together, and they wanted to be able to utilize the same offense and be comfortable in that. If those things are together, yeah, of course you're going to be able to probably get into the Big 12 title game because you have everything is your advantage, right? That momentum is there, and you look at the conference and say, okay, yeah, this conference can be run by Utah, but it didn't happen, right? And that's the nature of sports, right? You can sit here and you can say that everything's going to be great. Alabama's going through that right now as well, right? You're seeing that it's not just this easy. I mean, everybody knew that it's not an easy transition from Nick Saban. That doesn't change who Kellen DeBoer is as a head coach. He's still a phenomenal head coach. He still can do things that can get him there, but you've got to be able to get what you see as talent and be able to equate that onto the field, and you have to not make those mistakes that maybe your predecessor did. There's a lot that goes into playing the game, right? And that's why we enjoy it. It's an entertainment value. You want to go and be entertained. Unfortunately for Utah fans, you're not being entertained right now, right? You go into these games not really. You want your team to win, right? Like, I get it. Like, for me, like, I've been outside of fandom for so long, honestly, because I've been in media for so long that it's hard for me to understand the general fan, quite honestly. And I'm just going to be point blank, right? Like, growing up, I had my teams, and I still have some of those teams that I cheer for. And if you see me on Twitter, like, I might cheer for them. But at the end of the day, like, I'm not this fanatical person because I understand the relationship that I have with sports now, right? I'm not getting too high. I'm not getting too low. That's just the nature of who I am. I've always kind of been that way, quite honestly. Like I don't ride or die with the team. Maybe early on, like, when I was younger, like I would be much more frustrated. And I'm talking like teenage years, I was frustrated. So I don't understand that. And that's my problem, right? Like, I don't understand it to that sense because I have conditioned myself in a lot of ways where wins and losses don't matter. I'm looking for storylines. That's ultimately my job as a journalist, and I've always wanted to be doing this, is telling stories. I like the stories. I like to be able to talk to people. I want to help them in terms of getting their reach and understanding who they are beyond a game, right? You see... Everybody can see what's happening on the field, and you can form your own opinions, but I love to be able to see the makeup of a player and what makes them tick and like why they're so passionate about certain things, right? That's my job. Like, that's what I love. And so results don't necessarily matter. How I got here, I don't honestly remember. I don't remember what I was talking about other than, the results on the field can change. But I think at the end of the day, yes, this is entertainment. You want to be entertained. You want to have fun. And there's, you never know what's going to happen. And that's what's fun. And if you can have a healthy relationship with that, I think you're going to be in a better situation here. Right now, that Utah's not really in contention for a Big 12 title. So just go have fun. Hope that this team does well. Hope that they can do what they need to. And I don't want to say move on, but just kind of enjoy it with that perspective, right? And look forward to the next year. I know it's not easy to say that, right? Because you want your team to do well. You don't want to, kind of cast aside this season before you have to. Like I said, take the BYU game. Make that your big game that you're having and be excited about that. You still first have to get through Houston, right? You still want to be able to see some progress there. And if you can't get past Houston, honestly, I don't know what to tell you. And I'm gonna talk about them in just a second. I want to get to Utah's defense real quick. This season, it's one of those where Morgan Scalley talked about it. I think it was last week, where he said they're not the elite defense that they're trying to be, right? Utah tries to be an elite defense, and for the most part, many seasons they are. They're pretty high up in the rankings in most statistical categories. Run defense especially is one of the things that, Utah kind of rests on. There's several years where they're inside the top 10, right? Like, this is a team that really focuses in on that and wants to make it kind of their crown jewel of the team. And because of that, for so long, Utah's been so conditioned with Kyle Whittingham having this phenomenal defense for the 20 years that he's been the head coach, that you kind of get disappointed when things aren't elite, right? And that's to be expected, right? Like, you still want to see these things there, and you still want to be able to see them produce. But this is a defense that is still doing some pretty remarkable things, right? First off, looking at the third down defense, I know a lot of people get frustrated with third downs for some reason. And, there's a name that people use for it, and I think it is absolutely ridiculous because it just doesn't hold up to the test of time in terms of the statistics, and numbers don't lie. But Utah leads, or is in fifth in the country in third down defense, right? Opposing teams are only converting on them 26.2% of the time. That sounds, looking at that when you say, 26.2, that's a quarter of the time. But that's literally the fifth best in the country. Out of 103 attempts, teams have only converted 27 times on third down. And I know there's moments in games where it feels like, oh my gosh, they're getting another third down. Look at that TCU team. If I remember right, they were converting at, let me see if I had the number right here. Sorry. They were converting at a 48.7%. Last year, or in games, they're converting 50% of their third downs, and Utah held them significantly below that. They're doing that to a lot of teams, right? Where they're able to hold teams down. There's moments where teams are going to get those, right? Like you can't hold every single one. And I guess you could, but like it's just fairly impossible. They're doing a great job. Their biggest issue in large part has been creating havoc plays. Early on in the season, this team was doing a phenomenal job of getting in that backfield. They were doing things to be able to get to the quarterback and putting a lot of pressure. And the circumstances aren't all the same, right? They're not easily one-to-one. Partially, some of that is Connor O'Toole being out with an injury. You've lost Junior Tafuna for time. You've lost Keanu Tanavasa for time. You've lost Karene Reed, who provides that communication and help, where now that puts pressure on somebody like a Lander Barton to kind of step up and do things. And it's not that he can't do it, but you're starting to think more, right? These players are starting to think more, and as a defense especially, you can't think. That sounds funny, but you have to just go. You have to be very instinctual. You have to do what you need to in a way where you can't think. Because once you think, you're starting to see where Utah is right now, right? Where they're missing plays just barely. You saw against Arizona where they would get in the backfield, but they could not contain. And they were just like, fractions away from being able to sack Noah Fafita. It's little things like that where Utah needs to... Logan Fano said it best. He said, we need to capitalize on the opportunities and attack more. That's really it. Like, you can come into this and say, okay, well, why are you not getting havoc plays when you were getting it before? It's not always an easy thing to diagnose, but at the end of the day, it really is just being more opportunistic, right? Being able to be in there, not think about those things. Just go after the quarterback and do what you need to. Obviously, you still have to have sound technique, and you've got to wrap up the right way, and you've got to be able to not over pursue. Like, all those things matter, right? But all of that training, it should be harder during the week because you're working so hard to be able to get something down that when it comes in the game, you should just be able to be instinctual and be able to do it. And that's the hard part about playing sports, right? Is if you can finally feel comfortable doing that in the week where, that becomes the grind, then it becomes much easier in the game. They just haven't been able to be there, right? Lewis Powell said it, they just have to finish. That's really it, right? Like, there's no magic pill there either. There's nothing that's suddenly going to change and it's just like, oh, well, duh, if we did this, it's going to be more havoc plays. No. This is a team that they just have to finish. That really is what it is. You've got, I think it was Karene Reed talking about how sometimes a lot of the players are thinking too much and they're thinking about maybe the losses or they're thinking about stuff. That's not who they are. They just need to play aggressive. They just need to, get in the backfield, do what they need to, and everything's going to be fine. At the end of the day, this is a defense that, is doing its job to be able to help Utah win games, right? And it takes two parts of the game to be able to work, right? You can add special teams in there, and most of the time special teams don't factor in until they do when you get, punts blocked and field goals missed, then they matter. But for the most part, I'm just going to focus on the two sides, right? Defense is doing its job, and we know that offense is not doing its job. The reality is even when you look at the scoring, Utah's average scoring from an offense every single year, Utah has put them in a position where if they would just score an average number of points in a game that they've had, they would win every single game this year, right? In Utah's wins, they've allowed 0 points, 12 points, 21 points, 19 points. Okay, you got wins those games. Nothing to be worried about. The games that you've lost, the opposing team has scored 23 points, 27 points, and 13 points, right? Outside, even this year, Utah's averaging 24 points per game. I know that's inflated because of other games, so, I get it. It happens. But even if you were to just look at the average points, the only game that Utah would have lost this year by just scoring your average points this year is the game against Arizona State. And that came on a last-second touchdown, essentially. You're in these games. So, okay, you're 6-1, everything's good, everything's great. Even last year, which clearly was outside of, what's been happening lately, one of Utah's lowest outputs on offense, where they averaged 23.2 points per game, they're still winning a majority of those games, right? You're still doing it. 2022, 38.6, 21, 36.1 points. In 2020 even, when that shortened season, you were still averaging 30 points. 2019, 32.3. 2018, 28.1. 2017, 29.5. And 2016, I'm going to go back as far as that, 29.8. All of those are wins, right? If you can just get your average output, and I understand not every game is that, right? You don't just average those points every single game. But that's the nature of where this defense is, right? They're putting Utah in a position to be able to succeed. The offense has to be able to move forward. Now, Kyle will always say it doesn't matter what points were scored on offense. If, Utah can only score 7 points, Utah should be able to hold the team to 6. Now, that's a high benchmark to have, right? Like, that's not generally happening. And obviously, if you were truly, truly elite, maybe you're into that level. I just, I think that's a tough thing. And I know that the defense believes that, but that's a very tall task. The end of the day is that Utah just needs to score more points. And that's not a secret to anybody. It is what it is. But you look at that, and this Utah team, if you just get your average output, if you can just score your average amount of points over the last decade, essentially, if not more, Utah wins every single one of those games. And I know it's easy to say it that way, but that's the nature of where this team is. The defense is absolutely doing whatever they need to be able to get you to wins. It's not like they're getting blown out 36 to 10 and, you just couldn't stop these teams. You don't have the Oregons, you don't have the Washingtons, you don't have the USCs on your schedule anymore that are generally going to really test you and put up those points. There's teams in this conference that can do that, but they're not to that same level, right? Like, you're not getting that high-level production. This Utah defense is very capable in the Big 12 of being able to stop teams. You've just got to get an offense that moves forward. We get it. We understand it. Bajakian will potentially get that turned around, potentially. But that's where Utah's at. We get it. Let's move on. Let's preview Houston. All right, so Houston, Utah comes into this game Saturday. It's a 5 p.m. kick. Here, Utah time, 6 o'clock in Houston. The game will be on ESPN Plus, and I saw some people joking that they're happy that it's on ESPN Plus because then people can't see how bad it is. I get that, but it is what it is, right? This is a series, though, that these two teams haven't played since 1978. Houston got a 42-25 win. Houston actually has a 4-0 record over Utah all time. I don't know what that means at this point because that was literally 50 years ago, basically. Okay, not that. I'm not 50, but that's dating myself a little bit. 1978. That's much closer to anyway. Yeah, whatever. It's a little over 40. We'll say that. Okay. So what those mean is nothing, right? You're in the present. This Houston team is bad. As bad as Utah has been on offense, Houston just doesn't really have much in terms of an offense, right? Looking at some of the stats, their scoring offense is 133rd out of 134 teams. They're averaging 13.7 points per game. They're last in the Big 12. Big shocker. This is a team that just isn't scoring a lot. Rushing, they're 12th in the Big 12. They're 87th in the country. They're only averaging 136 points. Passing, they're 123rd in the country at 166 points. They're last in the Big 12 there. It's an offense that just hasn't been able to click, right? There's talent, but it's not to the level where they need it to be, right? Willie Fritz is a great coach, but this is his first year there. He's trying to develop. He's trying to get this going. If they can get it going, Houston is an incredibly fertile recruiting ground, and they'll be 100% fine. But they have to get there, right? They have to be able to move forward. This year is just not that year. That's not to say that Houston can't beat Utah. Houston beat TCU. So, as much as we want to sit here once again on paper that things can't happen, there's very much so in the realm of possibility that this Houston team can beat Utah, right? It's a situational game. That's what it is. With that being said, this offense, especially against what Utah's defense is doing, especially with Karene Reed back there, not that he's the only guy that matters, but with him kind of being the vocal presence, showing that leadership, really kind of commanding what that defense is able to do, this feels like a Utah defense that could hold them honestly under 100 yards. Now, I don't want to predict those types of things because those games come along every once in a while, but they're not easy, right? It's just you have to have an all-around just overwhelming presence on defense to be able to make that happen. And you're in a road environment. It just generally doesn't happen, right? But with how little output this Houston offense produces, it is within that realm, right? I think this Utah defense, they're hungry. They want to be able to prove that they can continue to be there. and you're going to see some opportunistic guys that are going to try to get some turnovers, right? There's been a lot of talk about, if there's one area where the defense has especially struggled, it's turnovers, right? They're not getting those same things. Utah's chance of ending its, I think it's 25 years. I can't even remember how long it's been. I need to go back and look at that. But 25 or so years, 20 years, whatever it may be, of a pick six every single season. They're the only team in the country that's done it, right? They lead. This is their opportunity to do it. Houston hasn't been good. This offense isn't good. This is an opportunity. On defense, looking at them real quick, they're much better, right? They're not as bad on the defensive side of the ball. They have talent there. With that said, it's still not anything earth-shattering. It's not something that Utah hasn't seen before, but it's gonna be improved, right? Their scoring defense is 66. They allow 23.6 points per game. So for a Utah team that is struggling, that could pose a problem, right? If you can't score against this Houston team, that becomes a challenge because they've done a good job, and you haven't shown that you've been able to do it the last few weeks. Run defense, 72nd in the country. They're allowing 145 yards. That's average. That's nothing good. That's nothing bad. Utah can absolutely do what it needs to here in the run defense, with the caveat that they can relax that pressure that's coming in the offensive line, that's coming towards Zach. The run game is going to be especially important, especially if you can get outside, relax it a little bit, if you can get the ball moving. That's going to be the real test there. And honestly, this is where Utah's opportunity is the most or has the best chance to be successful, because Houston's defense is ranked 19th in the country. They're pretty solid, right? They're third in the Big 12. They've done a good job. They attack the ball, they attack the passing, and do a good job that way. So defensively, this could be a slog fest for both of these teams, where offense is going to be a struggle. Utah should I caveat that now at this point, have the upper hand on the offense, but that's not to say that they couldn't be stalled out because of this Houston defense. So this could just be an old school football game where the winner is 7-3. I hope not. I need to see something more. I'm tired of just sitting through these games where there's not a lot of offense. So we'll see what happens there. Houston is terrible in third down conversions. They're just not moving the ball. Once again, 126th. They're converting at 29%. It's a little higher than what Utah allows, but given Utah's defense, I have to imagine that number goes down, and their quarterback play hasn't been great, and I'll talk about them in a sec, but just not there. Outside of that, red zone conversion is literally dead last in the country. They're awful. They're only converting in the red zone at 61.5%. Only 30.8% are touchdowns. So, for all the struggles that Utah's had in the red zone, magnify that by double for this Houston team. Maybe not double, but it feels that. I mean, honestly, it's not great. It's not, especially if you're only getting 31% of your trips down there as touchdowns. That's not a great situation. Like, you can move the ball all you want, but you've got to score, right? And they're not even getting field goals. Field goals are 30% as well. So this is a team that just is not put together well on offense. That's not to say that they can't do things, and obviously the defense can score points by getting takeaways and different things that way. But offensively, it's a bit of a slogfest, right? Like, it's not going to be easy. So looking at that, some of the players to watch or be on the lookout for in this, their starting quarterback, at least initially, was Donovan Smith. He's only thrown for 867 yards, 4 touchdowns, has 8 interceptions. He's completing it at a decent rate, 65.4%, but those 8 interceptions are not great, right? If I remember right, I think the last game, was it last week or one of these other weeks, he had 3 interceptions. So, I mean, it's just not great. And he's split time lately with Zion Chris. Kind of coming into the season, there's kind of a battle there. Zion Chris is available this week after a hamstring injury that he suffered against TCU a couple weeks ago. But he hasn't played a ton. He's only thrown 187 yards, 1 touchdown, 2 interceptions. He replaced Smith as the starter or I believe he's replaced. I can't remember now. I've read too many things. Either way, he's taken time from Smith, and they've kind of tried to turn the page on Smith a little bit and put him in. However, with that injury, they had to put Smith back in, and things didn't turn out. So he is available. Whether he starts or not, that remains a question. Because he hasn't produced a ton and he hasn't got a ton of reps, you don't know exactly what you're going to get there. The reference points in terms of stats just haven't been there. Similar mindset where he's had 1 touchdown to 2 interceptions. Not a great ratio there. Just as a reference for these two guys, Isaac Wilson in his career at Utah so far, he's thrown for 1,029 yards, 7 touchdowns, 8 interceptions. So been much more productive than these guys. And so you can be frustrated all you want that he's a freshman quarterback, but he's still producing at a better rate. Yeah, you don't like those 8 interceptions, but he's still moving the ball downfield. So that's what you've got on quarterback there. Running back, they're 2 running backs, Stacey Sneed and Rashawn Sanford II. They just haven't produced as much either. Their leading rusher, Sneed, is 245 yards with 1 touchdown. Just as a reference point, again, Mekhi Bernard has 731 yards this year and 2 touchdowns. There's just not a lot of production there, right? Rashawn Sanford has 222 yards, 1 touchdown. That's not to say that these guys can't be effective and they can't, do stuff to be able to hurt Utah. It just hasn't been at a high level this year. They just don't move the ball, and even though both average over 5 yards per carry, they're just not able to get enough touches to be able to be an impact. And so, this Houston offense is just not on the field that long. It's lessening everything. Wide receivers, kind of a similar situation. It's just kind of a mid-level for all of them. Mekhi Muse, he's their leading receiver with 218 yards. Another reference point there, Dorian Singer has 486. Keithy has 369, so you can kind of see that level. Stephon Johnson has 202 yards. He's their second leading receiver. He was held out last week with a concussion, but he's expected to be available this week. And then Joseph Manjack IV has 194 yards and 2 touchdowns as their third leading receiver. At the end of the day, these 3 can do stuff, but they just haven't produced at the level that Houston needs from them, right? All around, run game, passing game, things just haven't really been as effective, and they haven't been able to do what they need to. So curious to see kind of the battle here, see if Zion Chris can do a little bit more there to be able to help that offense move. But against this defense, I have to imagine, Utah's defense, I have to imagine that this becomes probably one of their toughest tasks of the season to try to move the ball. Once again, Utah has to move the ball on offense. So if they can't do that, I don't know what to tell you. If you can't beat Houston, you're in for a long season, and it's already been a tough season. So it's going to get even worse if you can't beat Houston. Outside of that, injuries from Houston, they just lost their left tackle Dakota White with a season-ending foot injury. He started in their last 3 games, so that poses some problems there on the offensive side of the ball as well. So we're just going to end with that. There's not much more to honestly recap. I think this is a great opportunity for Utah if they can capitalize on it, right? Like, you've got to be able to go down into Houston and be able to show that you could do more. If you can simplify this game for the offense, I think that can help. But at the end of the day, you're really just trying to play for yourselves, trying to play for pride. And I think this Utah team's there. I think they can do it. But you have to be able to take the handcuffs off. You've got to be able to simplify things, and you've got to be able to do what you can to move that ball downfield. And if Utah can do that, I think you've got a good chance in this Houston game. But, the way things are going, anything is possible at this point. And if I have to come back on Monday and talk about how Utah lost another game, I don't know how things are going to go. So we'll see what happens. Hope you guys have a good weekend. Hope for your sake that this Utah team can put some offense on the board, and we will chat with you again next week.